or trying to be the best at this like very difficult game, like that's something that interests me. Yeah, people look at you like you're crazy, but just my personality and the way I kind of operate, I'm sort of used to that. I've always kind of like danced to my own beat, and I've kind of found a little enjoyment too in like being an iconoclast.
Those who live a high-performance life have figured out how to consistently bring their best, their A game, to the most important areas of life. On the A Game Advantage podcast, you'll get to peek inside the mind of the world's highest-performing individuals so you can learn and model the mindsets and systems that allow them to bring their A game every day. With your host, Elliot Rowe.
Welcome to the A Game Advantage podcast. I'm your host, Elliot Rowe. This podcast is brought to you with Primed Mind, the mindset coaching app that can help you make the most out of your day. Check it out on Google Play or the iTunes Store. This week I'll be interviewing James Gettinger. He's a DFS player and one of the best in the world. He's made millions of dollars in the last year, performing at the highest level and winning some of the biggest championships. He can be talking to us about the emotional impact that those sessions have had on him and what he's needed to do to reach the top of those games. So let's jump into that interview. So today on the show, we've got James Gettinger, who is one of the top DFS players in the world. Now, you might not all know what DFS is. It's daily fantasy sports, and it's a much bigger industry than many of you may quite realize. So this year alone, in the 2017 season, James managed to win the Millionaire Maker in American football for obviously $1 million. He then won the DraftKings World Championships of Fantasy Football for $2 million. And he's also won over 100,000 multiple times in NBA this year on DraftKings and on FanDuel. So incredibly successful last 12 months for James in DFS. So James, welcome to the show and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to be on.
The first thing to ask really is what is daily fantasy sports and how are you making all this money playing it?
So daily fantasy sports is a variety of fantasy sports contests where you basically have salary constraints. You pick a variety of players. If you pick a player, anyone else who's playing in the contest against you can also pick that player. And then there's a structured payout based on how your portfolio of players perform that evening. Contests complete every night and are paid out, and then you do it all again the next day, and you pick new players who are playing that evening.
Okay, so similar to fantasy football, but without the drafting in quite the same way.
Exactly. There's no drafting, and it's not season long, obviously. So if you lose or you have a bad team one week, then you can just start fresh and have a completely new team the next.
And how have you found, the sort of the level of success that you've managed to find in this relatively niche subject?
I don't have a simple answer for that. It's taken quite a bit of work. My process is software driven. I have spent a lot of time analyzing my opponent's tendencies, what other people are doing, obviously projecting and trying to predict performance of athletes in sport, which is quite a challenge as well. But there are just a lot of different facets and aspects to the game, and it takes quite a bit of effort to excel at any one of them. So there's a lot.
Yeah, it's certainly incredibly complex. Now we've been working together for a long time. I actually started working with you prior to DFS as when you were a poker player. So talk about that decision to transition from poker to DFS, and some of the challenges that came about over that period of time.
It was a great challenge. I had heard anecdotally for a little while around 2014 that a lot of poker players were seeing success in fantasy sports. That there was a lot of crossover in the skills that it required. And by becoming a successful poker player, you were developing skills that suited you in fantasy sports. So I began writing software, acquiring data, and dabbling in it. And after a couple weeks or a couple months, I started realizing that I needed to play a lot less poker and a lot more fantasy sports. Based on just the nature of the game and the volume that was being played at the time, it was clearly very lucrative. So the decision was easy once I kind of dipped my toe in the market.
And, with any of these sorts of things like poker, fantasy sports, there are always the swings to deal with. So over your career, sort of, where did you reach in those swings and how did you manage to overcome that?
Downswings are always difficult. It's impossible not to question yourself and question your process. And for me, it's been a major challenge to not let my self-image, the way I think about myself, to ebb and flow with my short-term results. Because for me, it never feels as good to win as it feels bad to lose. I mean, that's quite a challenge.
Just thinking about sort of when those downswings did hit, what sort of emotions would come up for you?
There's a lot of questioning if you're doing the right thing, because obviously being a poker player or a fantasy sports player, you're consistently taking a lot of risk. Just existentially, you're not pursuing a traditional career. So it's pretty easy when things are going poorly to really feel down about yourself, feel down about your decisions. And sometimes lose sight of objectivity and lose sight that if you zoom out and look at your performance and look at your results, it's very clear that you have made good decisions.
And what did you do to sort of take control of your mindset over these times? And what do you have in place now for, clearly you're going to have bad, we've spoken about all the good times in DFS, but clearly there are going to be bad times as well. What do you do when those periods come up?
During those periods, I'm particularly driven to improve, which is a good thing. It's very hard, and I think maybe I would be a more successful DFS player if when I was seeing great results, I was driven to stay up all night working on my process. So I do find that motivation during the downswings, which is a good thing. But some ways that I think for me, meditation has been a critical part of remaining objective during those periods. It's very tough when things feel like they're falling apart and you aren't getting the results that you think are warranted. It's very tough to continue making good decisions during that period. And obviously performance is critical in fantasy sports. There are many evenings when you're making elastic decisions. And if you're not playing your best, you shouldn't really expect to profit. Clearly, as with poker as well, like when things start going badly, things can cascade. And now not only have you been losing, but you're also making worse decisions. So you have worse expectation, which compounds the issue. Yeah, for me, meditation, I think, is pretty important. Trying to be thoughtful, being process-driven, just mindful of when negative emotions are coming up, particularly when you're working, and sort of just acknowledging them, setting them aside and saying, like, okay, I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I'm feeling all sorts of emotions. That's okay. But my goal is to be the best fantasy sport player I could be today. So I'm going to set that aside and try to make the best decisions I can.
Yeah, and it's so close to what I hear from, athletes and competitors in other sports as well, that stepping aside from the emotion is key to be able to put those performance in. And it is one of those things, obviously, I am a mindset coach. I work with yourself. I've worked with a lot of other daily fantasy sports players as well. How important do you feel that mindset is in being successful in this? Because it is something where, sometimes guys have said to me, like, I don't really understand where mindset can be a benefit in DFS because it doesn't have the same in the moment reaction like perhaps a final table in poker or an athletic event would have.
I think that that's a pretty ridiculous thing to say. Whether or not you acknowledge it, mindset is critical in fantasy sports. First of all, I think there is a lot of last minute decision making where even for me, like a couple wrong clicks, even just technically like getting in rosters at the last minute and things like that have cost me quite a bit of money. In NBA particularly, you can get last minute news that completely changes the decisions you should be making that evening. And so being cool under pressure, being focused, being objective, those are all incredibly important in those moments. Not only that, I think that even if you have quite a bit of time to digest information and you don't have necessarily the high pressure, real time decisions like you would at a poker final table, if you're betting hundreds of thousands of dollars, you can feel a lot of emotions. Often when I'm done setting my rosters, I have sweat quite a bit on my like I need to change my clothes. And that's an NFL where the decisions are not that pressing, right? Like you basically know what you're going to do. And then a couple hours before the game, you get the official lineups, and then you make minor adjustments. But there's still a lot of decision making. And it's high pressure as well. So anything you can do to ensure that you're performing at your highest capacity possible is just going to be worth so much.
And in terms of sort of errors you've seen from other players in DFS, is it something where, you see lots of jumping outside of bankroll management or crazy behavior, even just from seeing shifts in people's play, that you can see, hey, this guy's sort of, I guess, tilting in a way and not playing to where they should be?
Absolutely, yes.
And what sort of thing would point that out to you?
I see a lot of erratic play from players. I see people who change the stakes that they're playing pretty drastically night to night. To me, that clearly indicates like a lack of thoughtfulness. They don't really have a process necessarily. It's just like they're kind of clicking or whatever they feel that evening they're going to do. They might be chasing losses. They might be have some sort of other emotional thought process. I think it's very infrequently a objective thought process where they are saying like, I have material reason to think that I should have a larger edge tonight versus other nights, so therefore I'm going to play in a higher stake contest than usual. I don't really think that's based on looking at their play night to night, like I don't think that's what's going on very often. And there are just like a lot of little things in fantasy sports as well. Taking advantage of late swap is one of them, where there are people who even play high stakes who just like don't do all of the little things that one should be doing to maximize their ROI. Whether that's a mental game thing or entitlement or some sort of emotional thought process, I don't know. But I just see a lot of like less objective behavior, I suppose.
And one of the things I've always found interesting is what it does to your watching of sports. That you are playing DFS. Is it still fun to watch a football match or to watch NBA, or has it now become, just very much a points-driven process, and there's no real joy in watching sports anymore?
I don't sweat the game so much. I do watch. I often watch condensed games as well, and I take notes about things like coaching decisions and things I think would materially affect my decisions going forward in fantasy sports. I actually enjoy watching games more now than I did before. I was never that enthusiastic a sports fan before I started playing fantasy sports, and now I really appreciate the athleticism of the players, and I think I understand the strategy a little more. So like when I watch an NBA game now, I'm like aware of the coaching decisions, aware of the lineup changes, aware of like the work the players are putting in to reach that level. And like that makes it all the more exciting for me.
And that's funny. I actually had someone mention at one point, if you love a sport, you should never gamble on it. I mean, is that something you can sort of see as well? So that for those fans who are sort of an obsessed, I don't know, Yankees fan or something, that staying away from betting the home side makes sense.
If you need to make a decision like that, I don't know if fantasy sports is right for you to begin with.
Yeah, it's just the.
It's kind of like saying like I'm never going to play like jacks in poker because like it always goes poorly for me. Like if you're going to be making decisions based on a prejudice like that, like I'm a Yankees fan, so I'm never playing the Yankees, or similarly, I'm a Yankees fan, so I'll always play the Yankees. I always find it very funny when there's a DFS player and they have a player's name in their handle. And then you see their roster and it has that player in it. I mean, I think that's just makes me feel like fantasy sports might live forever. But
yeah, there's going to be some money there for a while. And then sort of taking it into a bit of a more personal note, obviously, you've made the decision initially to be a poker player and then move into DFS. These are more left field professions. So, what made you decide to take that route in life? And, think that I'm going to think outside of the box. I'm going to take a risk most people would be uncomfortable taking because I believe I can make this work. How did your life lead you that way?
So I studied computer science in college. After college, I had a job as a software developer, a competitive sought after job. After about 18 months working for a large company, I sort of decided it wasn't right for me. I kind of was craving the competition that like poker and fantasy sports offered. So I quit without too much of a plan for how I was going to support myself. I just knew that I wanted to work on my own projects and be my own boss. I ended up playing more and more poker on the internet, and that was taking up ever increasing amount of my time. And I soon realized that like, hey, maybe I could support myself doing this. And even if I'm making quite a bit less than I was in my desk job, like I'm feeling more fulfilled. I'm enjoying the competition. I'm enjoying working for myself. I'm seeing the fruits of my labor and like getting better or trying to be the best at this like very difficult game. Like that's something that interests me.
And then, from the sort of the social side, explaining to friends and family, hey guys, I'm not going to be a software developer any longer. I'm going to move into playing these games for a living. How did that register with everyone?
Yeah, people look at you like you're crazy. But just my personality and the way I kind of operate, I'm sort of used to that. I've always kind of like danced to my own beat. And I've kind of found a little enjoyment too in like being an iconoclast or a little like heterodox. So when you tell people that you're playing poker, people are like, really? Like that's what you're doing? I sort of have that contrarian aspect to my personality, which also very much helps in poker and fantasy sports, where there's a lot of value in studying the things that no one else is studying or behaving in ways in game that no one else is behaving.
Yeah, and explain that to the audience for fantasy sports as to why that would be so important to be contrarian in your thought process.
Sure. I mean, the structures of a lot of the contests in fantasy sports are very top heavy, particularly these tournaments. You might have a tournament like the Millionaire Maker on DraftKings where hundreds of thousands of people are putting in $20 and the winner wins $1 million or more. In order to succeed in a contest like that, you generally need to be playing players that very few other people are playing so that you have separated yourself from the field. When your players are having a 1 or 2 standard deviation performance, no one else is really benefiting from that. And your roster is, in terms of performance, in a league of its own. And the nature, particularly with NFL, I see that there's one set of games a week on Sunday. And then for the rest of the week on ESPN and all the sports media, there's a lot of recency bias. People talk over and over again about how if Tom Brady just threw 5 touchdowns, he's the best quarterback of all time. And if he threw 3 interceptions, all of the discussion on sports radio might be, is he done? Is that it? Will he ever throw a touchdown again? So the field tends to polarize pretty heavily based on certain factors like that. And often it polarizes itself or concentrates itself for sort of non-material reasons, where it might just be recency or for whatever reason a player's hyped up more than he should be. And so then there's a lot of value avoiding those plays. So when that player fails, your rosters have a high likelihood of success. And then obviously, as I was saying before, just playing players who no one else has. So when they have their season best performance, your roster performance is just far, far better than the field's.
It definitely makes sense. And, if you had someone ask you, James, I want to be your level, I want to learn how to get into the fantasy sports, what would you say to them, and what would you tell them about the work ethic needed if you want to take this seriously?
Well, that's a great challenge. And I don't think that if you have a goal that ambitious that you're really setting yourself up for success. If you want to be the best fantasy sports player, as with most other fields, I think you need to start with more attainable goals. Like, I want to beat the low stakes this year. I want to play the $3 games, 150 rosters a day, and I want to consistently profit. And once you're able to do that, then you can start thinking about moving up in volume, moving up in stakes, because you're going to develop a lot of necessary skills playing the $3 games, playing the low stakes.
Okay, so that's very interesting. So you think having these smaller goals leading to a pathway to success would be the right way to approach fantasy sports for someone who is new to it?
I think it's essential. I don't think you're really setting yourself up for success if your goal is, I want to play the $5,000 contest on DraftKings. Because, I mean, you don't have a step-by-step process by which you're going to get there. And, like, it's hard for me. It would be very difficult for me to talk to a novice player and really, like, help them understand what it takes, because a lot of that learning just has to be done on your own. I could tell them what I think, my opinions on the games, my opinions on, like, obviously the amount of work that needs to be put in, how you should operate, how you should develop all of these skills. But a lot of that stuff isn't really going to sink in until you try it yourself. I think just struggling a little bit and learning to beat the games at the low stakes is, you're really going to develop the skills that you need as a DFS player. So, I mean, that's where I'd start.
Okay. And then in terms of sort of numbers of hours a week that you have to be aware of in fantasy sports, what would a normal week look like for you?
Well, Elliot, I think you say that if you put in amateur effort, then you should expect amateur results.
Pretty much.
During NBA season, I'm probably putting in 60 to 80 hours a week at this point. There were times in my career where I was putting in an unsustainable amount of work on the order of like 100 hours a week, where fantasy sports, when I was coming up, truly dominated like every waking hour of my life. I mean, I have had people ask me like, hey, how long do you spend making your rosters? I spent like an hour making my NFL rosters today. And if you're spending an hour making your NFL rosters, I think you're very unlikely to see success. I think that if you're putting in less than a full-time effort, you're not going to see good results. I mean, the game is very difficult. You're playing against very high aptitude players who have spent a lot of time. They might have private information you don't have. They almost certainly have created special tools and proprietary models that you don't have. They are likely spending at least 60 hours a week thinking about how they're going to beat you. So if you're not putting in that same effort, you're just not good at setting yourself up for success.
It makes complete sense, especially, we are playing for millions of dollars, aren't we?
Yes.
So it's very serious money, and you've got to put the effort in for that. And you mentioned the unsustainable 100 hours a week. How did you notice that the burnout was coming and make the decision to tone things down there?
I think that other people in your life might notice it before you do, because at least for me, I get a little tunnel vision and I'm just thinking about like, okay, I want to be the best DFS player I can be. So like, what am I going to do today to reach that goal? Working with you, I think you were one of the people in my life sort of pointing it out like, hey, this is not something that can go on forever. What you're doing, you can't stay up till 5 a.m. working on software and then wake up at 10 a.m. and like start doing 10 hours worth of NBA research. Like at some point, something's got to give. You can't keep doing that every day. And then just like friends, and particularly my girlfriend too, would notice like changes in my mood, changes in my health, how it was influencing other aspects of my life in a negative way. And that if you want to be the best player in DFS, you can't just use the brute force method like that. You really need to take a more holistic approach and make sure that you're performing your best and making the best decisions you can. Because having stayed up all night, you are not going to be making the best decisions you can during crunch time in the NBA. So there's a balance.
I really feel that's the case in everything as well, that, like you say, you can try and use the brute force in any business and it will be okay for a short period of times, but you get these really big diminishing returns of the hours that you're putting in because the quality drops and drops. And then, a couple of big mistakes can write off all of the good work you've done as well. So, it was good to see that balance has come back. And with that sort of 60 to 80, is that something you feel that is going to be, better for you longer term and over the next few seasons?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's not even close. I do feel like at times where I am trying to strike the right balance. At this point in my career, I am fighting sort of different mental game battles, where now with fortunately, the amount of success I've seen, I am kind of fighting to have the same motivation I had when I was starting from nothing. I mean, it's all a balance, right? Where if you spend too many weeks of playing well, but not really improving your process or not finding that extra 5 to 20 hours a week to work and improve on your process, then you're going to be falling behind. While the brute force method is unsustainable, I mean, it's also unsustainable to become complacent. Absolutely.
Yeah, again, with anything competitive, it's always about maintaining that edge over the field and the other people who are desperate to take your spot, which obviously you're going to have a few of those people chasing you with the way things have gone over the last couple of years.
And they are good. There are a lot of DFS players that I did not think were particularly skilled even a season ago that today I think are possibly better than me. So, I mean, there are a lot of very smart people who are trying to take my position away from me.
Man, it's cool to hear about sort of a different subculture people might not be aware of, and that it's just such a huge industry. And in terms of long-term plans for you, is it DFS for the foreseeable future, do you think, or are there other things that you have planned out moving forward?
I'm not quite sure. Sort of the nature in DFS is that the legal situation's looking good today. It's federally legal in the U.S., and there were some state level questions that have mostly been resolved at this point. Quite a few states have passed legislation making it clearly per se legal. There are fewer gray areas, which is good, but there is this sort of sense, because in poker in 2006, obviously a law was passed that made it explicitly illegal, or the bank transfers to poker sites were made explicitly illegal. There is always this sense that the federal law can change and fantasy sports could go away. So I do spend a fair amount of time thinking about the future. I don't have any concrete plans at the moment. Fantasy sports is still a very, very much a good thing in my life, so I'm going to stick with it in the short run. But I see myself in the future transitioning into different fields, possibly financial markets. But I have a lot of options, so there's excitement there as well.
Man, that's very cool. And just sort of cutting in before we finish off today, the big wins that you had, the live final that you won, the World Championships this year, what did it feel like to you to reach that pinnacle and win that biggest football tournament of the year?
It was unreal. I for the Millionaire Maker, when I had never had a 7-figure score before. And when it became clear to me that I was about a coin flip or better to win, I was stressing out to a point where I don't know if I would have been playing my best at a poker final table. And I was betting quite a bit on the way NFL works is there are multiple slates. So there's a slate that has all the games that's at a noon or 1 o'clock set in Eastern time. And then there are slates all the way until 8 p.m. when there's the primetime game. So I happen to be betting quite a bit on the primetime slate. So I have to kind of get a grip, get a hold of my emotions and be like, okay, I may win a heap of cash, but whatever happens, that's out of my control. And now I need to focus on making the best decisions I can. And actually that slate after the Millionaire Maker, there was a very big injury spot and Antonio Brown that I got correct. And I ended up winning, having over 6-figure profit on that slate as well, which I thought was I found a very rewarding accomplishment, because even when I felt like I was maybe in a position where I could tilt or not play my best, I was able to put that aside and make the best decisions I could. And in that slate, I ended up winning some of those tickets to the live final that I ended up parlaying into an even bigger victory.
Oh, I didn't realize it was that same night.
Yes,
so the Millionaire Maker night got you the tickets to the World Championships that you then won.
Yes, that's correct. And I mean, so while that was going on, when it was becoming clearer and clearer that I would win, I went on a jog, I came back, I meditated, and then I played my best for the evening, then turned off the screens.
Man, that's just phenomenal. It really is. Yeah, I mean, awesome stuff, James. It's been so fun to watch the journey over the last few years, from the switch from poker to fantasy sports to, becoming one of the most dominant players in the world at this. So thanks so much for coming on the podcast and having a chat to us today. I'm sure you've made some people's mouth water at the prospect of something else they might be trying. So you might have some more competitors after this show goes out and more people are aware of what's going on. But once again, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. I really hope so. I think DFS has a lot to offer. It's a very fun game, very challenging game, very rewarding game. So any way I can to encourage people to try it out, I think is a very good thing.
So thanks for listening to the show. It was great to have James on talking about the roller coaster of DFS that I'm sure very few of us or even knew existed, certainly at those levels of millions and millions of dollars. I hope you all enjoyed the show, and I'll be speaking at you next week. Talk to you soon.